I pray that in this new year, 5782, we will do this hard, hopeful, and holy work, finding our way out of Mitzrayim and Midbar, the narrowest of places and the vastness of wildernesses, together. Amen. This is how I ended my Rosh Hashanah sermon last week. I wanted to name where we've been and where we are. So many of us have been struggling with feelings of despair, with feeling like we are stuck or lost where we are. Many of us have not just been feeling this way since the pandemic started over 18 months ago, though certainly the pandemic has made things generally worse, but we have been struggling through a particularly vitriolic time in history. No matter what your politics are, you likely feel profoundly disappointed with the way we've been talking or not talking to one another. Civil discourse? What's that? When it comes to the despair born out of the state of the nation, the consequences of the pandemic, or some of the other meta challenges that we face, I believe with all my heart that it's really possible to do the hard, hopeful, holy work of finding our way out of the kind of darkness I just described. It's the kind of work best done by finding our way back to one another. And I believe with all my heart that no matter how long it takes, that together we can pull ourselves out of this awful, toxic stew. A few weeks ago, as I prepared for the Yamim Noraim, I reached out on social media and asked people what gave them hope. Their answers will not surprise you. Top of the list was children. Talking to them, watching them play, listening to their dreams, seeing them grow. Simple acts of kindness were also mentioned many, many times, and so was nature in its various forms. Seeing the sun rise and set, taking in the vastness of the ocean or of a mountain range, watching the stillness of a lake or the beauty of a blossoming flower. One person mentioned Nutella, and another voted for spring training. Now, I guess the fact that there's something as delicious as Nutella in the world is enough to give some of us hope. And some of our baseball teams actually give new meaning to the expression, hope springs eternal. Right? Then I read this answer. My husband with dementia can still laugh, even though he can't talk. It took my breath away. I was reminded that so many of us experience such profound pain in the innermost sanctums of our personal lives. It's not like I didn't know this. I've experienced my own dark moments, and I have been incredibly privileged to walk alongside some of you as you have navigated some of life's greatest challenges. Last week, when I spoke about navigating despair, I knew that I wasn't offering enough chomer, enough substance, for how to pull ourselves out of Mitzrayim or Midbar, out of the narrowest places or the vastest wildernesses in our personal lives. I did not want to say that the way out of the depths is just to turn into the light by literally watching a magnificent sunrise or sunset, because saying it felt trite or Pollyanna-ish. And while I agree that there's almost nothing more delicious than holding a baby or watching a toddler take their first steps or being confided in by an angsty teenager, I also know that sometimes the exquisite feeling that comes from these experiences most often only provides temporary relief when we are dealing with seemingly unyielding despair. So I want to go back to the Israelites, overwhelmed in both the narrowness of Egypt and the vastness of the wilderness, struggling to simply put one foot in front of the other as they carry the burden of their worries with them forward, hoping to reach the promised land, but feeling as small as grasshoppers, faced with devouring giants. The Israelites had a choice. 12 scouts, one from every tribe, had been sent by God through Moses into the promised land for the purpose of reporting back to the people that the land was worth the journey. 10 scouts came back and told them that the journey ahead was impossible. 10 scouts were determined for the people to believe Lu Matnu. If only we had died in Egypt or would die right here in the wilderness, that would be better than what we would have to face in this so-called promised land. But there were 2 other scouts, Caleb and Joshua, who had an entirely different message. They said, Alo na'aleh. Let us by all means go up, and we shall gain possession of the land we were promised, because Yachol Nuchala, we shall surely overcome whatever obstacles we face. What was it that made Caleb and Joshua believe that they would surely be able to overcome the obstacles ahead of them? According to the Torah, it was their belief in God that gave Caleb and Joshua the confidence to believe that they would succeed and settle safely in the promised land. And I suppose, as your rabbi, I could tell you to believe that God will be there with you and that with God by your side, well, that should be enough to help you through your Mitzrayim or your Midbar. But I actually think that if I told you that, it would be the same as suggesting that watching the sun bloom on the horizon or cuddling with a snuggly baby will cure all that ails you. I mean, a blooming sun and a snuggly baby definitely will give you a needed dose of hope. But not every situation can be cured so simply. Hope is often much harder than that. When I asked about hope online, my friend Jennifer directed me to an article she read last summer about school integration. In it, one of the experts, Richard Bury, made the point that hope is a discipline. He said, all the great changes in our society probably seemed impossible before the change was made. He continued, I think hope is a discipline because hope is a fuel that keeps you working. So I think I am hopeful, but I think you wake up every morning and you force yourself to be hopeful. The Sfat Emet, a 19th century Hasidic sage, taught the very same thing. He wrote, there is always hope, but we find hope in ourselves just as we find endless wisdom in the Torah. Just as the Mishnah says, turn it over and turn it over when it comes to the Torah, so it is with hope. Hope, hope, and hope again. Don't give up on it. Rather, keep reaching for it until you find your way back to it. This idea is beautifully reflected in an 18th century Kabbalistic prayer attributed to the Ramchal. It begins with a verse from the end of the book of Genesis, which breaks away from Jacob's poetic blessings of his sons from his deathbed. Jacob calls out to God, Lishuatcha kiviti, I hope for your salvation. Now, most of us know the Hebrew word for hope, tikva, because it's the name of Israel's national anthem, Hatikva, the hope. This Kabbalistic prayer plays on the word for hope, which has the Hebrew root letters Kuf, Vav. You hear it in Tikva. Now hear it in Kiviti, I hope. Next, hear it in another word, Kav. The word Kav means a line or a beam, as in a beam of hope. The prayer riffs on the word Kiviti. According to the prayer, God created the world but did not finish it. Rather, in an act of tzimtzum, of divine contraction or constriction, God also created an empty space for us to fill. The intention was for that empty space to inspire us and to draw the divine flow, a kav, to us, so that we could use it to fill that empty space with the products of our hope. In the prayer, our good deeds or songs or prayers draw this divine kav to us, and there are probably many more ways to draw that divine beam to us and from us. A kav, a line, can be endless. It can break through anything. And so the prayer concludes, through our actions, we can choose to create a kav of hope that connects us to the world of the divine, however you understand it. To summarize, the world was created but not finished. There is an empty space in the world which has been left for us to fill. It's for us to decide what we do with that empty space. The prayer calls for us to fill it with hope. But we know hope is hard. Hope is complicated. Hope makes us feel vulnerable. Hope might even seem impossible. But hope is also a discipline. Hope can be the fuel that keeps us going, so we have to choose it. And sometimes we might even have to force it on ourselves. This is the choice that the Israelites faced. Lu machnu, if only we would die here. Or alo na'aleh, let us by all means go up. We too have that choice. Each of us has the ability to draw lines of hope, even when it's incredibly hard, seemingly impossible. We can choose to draw that kav, that line of hope. We can push ourselves to hope and hope and hope until we find our way back to that beam that can help us break through despair, bear into it, and rise up all the way to wherever it is we want to go. Last week, the psalmist called out to God, "How long will you forget me? Forever?" And this week, the psalmist calls out to us in the last line of Psalm 27, which says, Kaveh el Adonai, chazak v'ya'ametz libecha, v'kaveh el Adonai. Kaveh el Adonai, draw your lines of hope to God. Chazak v'ya'ametz libecha, be strong and let your heart be courageous. Kaveh el Adonai, draw your lines of hope to God. This year, may we not give up, but rather hope and hope and hope until we find our way back to the hope we need to navigate through our Mitzrayim and our Midbar, through our narrow places and vast wildernesses. May we make the choice, alo na'aleh, let us by all means go up and find the fuel to keep us going through good deeds, prayer, song, or whatever fills the empty spaces before us and within us with hope. And may we know that we do not have to do this hard, hopeful, and holy work alone, but rather that we can find our way out of Mitzrayim and Midbar together with chazak v'ya'ametz libecha, with the strength and courage of our own hearts and the hearts of those around us. And together we say, Amen.